TV. Now, Rishi Sunak is facing a Brexiteer backlash over his deal with the DUP because of fears it will hamper Britain's ability to break free from EU rules. But it's been hailed as a great success, both in Westminster widely and indeed, of course, in Northern Ireland, where we brought back the Stormont power sharing deal. Kevin Marr is the author of United Ireland, Why Unification is Inevitable and How It Will Come About. He's also a former Labour advisor to Northern Ireland Secretary, and he joins us right now. Kevin, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Morning, Julia.
Now, first of all, do us a favour, for those of us who are not perhaps up to speed, although I think my guest in the studio, Philip Ingram, maybe, on the ins and outs of all these deals and the Windsor Framework and how this works. A Janet and John, if you would, explanation of what this new deal, now we've actually seen the black and white text, what this new deal actually means in terms of trade for Northern Ireland.
So, I mean, the issue at stake is fairly simple, that when we leave the European Union as a United Kingdom, Northern Ireland has a land border with the Republic of Ireland, which is inside the European Union. It's a 310-mile border, which is very hard to police and would require the erection of checkpoints and razor wire and all the rest of it. And given the context of the last 40 years of the Troubles, it's deemed to be a pretty bad idea to go down that road. So there had to be some checks taking goods from Great Britain across to Northern Ireland, because they could, of course, then have gone across an invisible border into the Republic of Ireland and to the single market. So that's the gist of the problem. This spent 5 or 6 years, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, trying to resolve this problem and didn't manage to do it. Now, Rishi Sunak did manage to do it. He got a deal with the European Union, the Windsor Framework, about 12 months ago, but that wasn't acceptable to the DUP because they believe, and the hardline unionists believe, that that puts a border in the Irish Sea between Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Which is what they've been rowing about for quite some time. So this is
absolutely.
So this is going to. I mean, we're told this is not. It's not quite exactly what Donaldson wanted. It doesn't go all the way, but there's not going to be routine checks on those goods going across the Irish Sea anymore.
That's it. Goods that go across the Irish Sea from Great Britain to Northern Ireland into the kind of Northern Ireland domestic market that are consumed there would have gone through a so-called green lane. That would have involved some checks. So what this deal effectively does is winnow out all those checks. There will still be some checks, depending on suspicions of criminality and one thing and another.
Exactly, and there are spot checks.
Most of the cocaine in Northern Ireland comes from Liverpool, so we know some checks.
But we know the big issue here was that everyone expected there to be a bit of a fudge, and actually after the actual moment of Brexit, everyone would calm down, including the EU. And as it was, the EU, egged on a lot by President Macron of France, decided to basically, I always like to use the phrase, punishment beating. They wanted to make sure life was hard. They wanted to make life hard for whoever was in charge in Westminster and for the people of Northern Ireland, because it's the only route they had because of that land border with an EU country in the form of Ireland. So basically, 20% of all checks on external goods coming into the EU were very bizarrely made in the Irish Sea, as opposed to all these incredibly porous borders in the Mediterranean and in Eastern Europe. I mean, we know perfectly well, I think it was less than 2% of goods going that way. I think it was, under 1%. They knew what they were doing. They wanted to make life difficult. Do we think that this is going to resolve this enough, that that Northern Ireland's going to have what ostensibly a lot of people have thought was the best of both worlds: trade with the EU, trade across to Ireland, and also trade with the British mainland. And actually, this was going to be a good deal for the people of Northern Ireland.
In the longer term, it probably will be. I mean, this is the great paradox. There's two ironies here. One is that it does give Northern Ireland the best of both worlds. It can give Northern Ireland economically a shot in the arm, which might put some years on Northern Ireland. It might be good if you're a unionist politically. But this row has also been, it's not a green versus orange row, which is typically how we understand the conflict in Northern Ireland. This is an orange versus red, white and blue row. This is a row between the DUP and a British Conservative and Unionist government, which Jeffrey Donaldson said slightly elliptically yesterday that Rishi Sunak's the only person that's managed to sort this out, having had all kinds of promises previously from Liz Truss and Boris Johnson that have come to nothing. So I think Unionists feel that they've been led up the garden path a number of times, which is absolutely true.
Yeah.
And finally, this thing has been resolved to the degree that Jeffrey Donaldson should be able to sell this to the vast majority of his party. Even the Orange Order seems to have come on side today. So the flack that he's going to get is fairly marginal.
And also, we know that Labour are going to support it, and it's statutory instrument. It's going to go through Parliament. The EU, of course, have to play along, but I'm assumes they have been squared off. But there has been some anger from some Brexiteers pointing out that under this agreement, all new laws will be screened to ensure that's EU rules will screen they do not create extra trade barriers with Northern Ireland. So new laws in the UK. And the problem with that is that so when we have a new law that is not the same as the EU law, that will create trade barriers. Now, effectively, what we're saying is we'll stick with the EU rules because it makes life easier and doesn't create difficulties with Northern Ireland, their trade, which means in terms of that aspect of Brexit, what was the point? The whole point was we'd make our own rules, have our own regulations, we'd be free to trade, with the rest of the world. We're making trade deals with other countries. But if we're going to just have alignment with the EU rules, some of which are really just unnecessarily protective. They're there to protect, French farmers, Spanish fishermen, etc. They're not there. German industry. They're not there to protect our key industries. Then it kind of defeats part of the object of Brexit, doesn't it? Those Brexiteers have got a point.
They have got a point. If you're a believer in Brexit, you're a believer in diverging and doing things differently. So what Rishi Sunak has effectively done is to say, partly for a quiet life, and partly it reflects where we are in this Parliament as well, that if he can get some problems out of his in-tray, and he'll hopefully manage to restore government in Northern Ireland, that's for him in the short term, and everything now is in the very short term. Yeah. If you're Prime Minister that's 20 points behind, in the very short term, fixing things in Northern Ireland is probably a better win for him than it would be actually trying to please some of his Conservative MPs on things that are much more longer term. We're in the very short term calculation business at the moment, and in the very short term calculation businesses, there's a chance of fixing Northern Ireland, getting that back up and running, and the imagery of that working again has got to be good for Rishi Sunak. That's exactly the name of the game for him.
2 years on, it's untenable for that to continue. That's a very good thing. Can I just ask you, just finally, very briefly, if you would, Kevin Marr, you're the author of A United Ireland: Why Unification is Inevitable and How It Will Come About. Why is it inevitable and how will it come about?
Well, first of all, Northern Ireland simply wasn't built to last. I mean, that's point number one. I mean, it's existed for 103 years. What we're likely to see on Friday or Saturday is the election of Michelle O'Neill, the Vice President of Sinn Féin, as the First Minister of Northern Ireland. Now, Northern Ireland was created to keep people like her out. It was created as a Protestant unionist fief and run like that for 50 years until we got the Troubles. And I mean, 30 years of that. And we've had 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement to kind of stop-start politics. But the long-term drift in terms of electoral evidence, in terms of the demographic changes in Northern Ireland, is that Northern Ireland is now changing. It will continue to change, and it's got associate status in the UK anyway, from the time of the Good Friday Agreement. If a majority of people there wish to leave in a referendum, the British government will facilitate that request for that to happen. That's not the same as in Scotland or in Wales. So Northern Ireland's been in an antechamber, if you like, for the last 25 years since the Friday.
Kevin Marr, fascinating to talk to you. Thank you. I have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for the explanation. That was very helpful. Thank you for that, Kevin Marr there in Northern